taíno? Inca?
Three bones in the ear.
Oh.
The Inca.
Santa Maria.
That's right. You had one of them, I heard it.
Yes.
One.
Stapes.
Stapes?
Inca stapes, and I know there's the one that's the
Malleus.
The malleus.
So the malleus, the incus, and the stapes are the auditory ossicles, which is a good name for them because they oscillate. They vibrate back and forth. And in grade school, you probably would have learned them as the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrupus. Malleus is mallet. It does look a little bit like a hammer. Incus looks a little bit like an anvil. And the stapes actually looks exactly what it is. It looks like a stirrup, but it's actually a tuning fork. That's what that structure is there for. So, and this equipment is in the middle ear. And the middle ear is connected to the pharynx by the eustachian tube. Now on the outside, the only part of the ear that we see is the pinna, which is basically there to cup sound. And humans don't really have very good pinnas. It was a trade-off when we were coming through the birth canal. So it's like, you know what, you can have big ears or you can get born. It's a one or the other. Well, we went through this weird phase after coming down from the trees. We started walking upright, and I don't think the body has ever completely recovered from that change, because there's a lot of rewiring going on here. But one of the things about an efficient step is the narrower your pelvis is, the more efficient the step is, because there's less of this wiggling side to side. So a narrower pelvis is a little bit more efficient. So as humans, or pre-humans were coming into this field, this was getting narrower, but at the same time, the head was getting bigger because we were putting all these extra brains in there. So there's going to be a stopping point there. And so one of the things that got sort of left off is like, well, we're going to sacrifice the ears. So the ears lay flat against the skull, and they don't really move around very much. Think about like a dog or giraffes or something like that. They can swing those ears around pretty good. We can't do that. The pinna is made out of elastic connective tissue, elastic cartilage actually, so that you can hang earrings off them and things like that.
Stretched.
There are some chimpanzees that do that. They make there was this female chimpanzee, and she fashioned some grass, and she sort of attached it to her ear, sort of on one. And then the other girls in the tribe thought, well, that's a pretty cool thing. So just in this one group of chimpanzees out there in the Congo or something like that, they all have this little fashion thing going. So
Fashionable chimpanzees.
so let me see. We've got the pinna, then we have the ear canal. Now the ear canal is going through the temporal bone. That's the external auditory meatus, if you remember that name there, external auditory meatus. The meatus is, meatus just means a channel, and it is, what do you have in your ears? What's that lined with?
Wax.
So the deal with the wax is that it's an insect repellent. Bugs don't like to get stuck in things. So, the next thing you know, this happened to my Aunt Jake, and he got trapped in amber, and it was bad, and so anyway. So if the bug does get in there, it starts sticking and doesn't like that and sort of backs out. Now sometimes, of course, they're going to get disoriented and they go further in, but believe me, they're no happier than you are. The next thing over here is the ear canal, the eardrum. We call it the eardrum. The fancy name is the tympanic membrane. Tympanic membrane. In a symphony, the drum set is called the timpani. So that's where that's coming from. And by the way, this whole contraption on the outside, this is the external ear. This is the middle ear where the hobbits live. This is the inner ear. Oh, we got a Lord of the Rings joke. Okay.
Yes, I love
so
Lord of the
people
Rings.
got it. Okay, so bring Mr. Frodo, but I can carry you. Anyway. So we have now, so basically we've gotten the stuff from, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. So it's in French 75, it's the outer ear, middle ear, inner ear. There we go. Close enough. So now we've gotten the vibrations into this point. Now the tympanic membrane starts to vibrate, and as it vibrates, it hits the malleus, which hits the incus, which hits the stapes. So you see, we have these vibrations being transmitted. Like right now I'm speaking, and the human voice is like a clarinet. It's a two-reeded instrument, and you blow air through these two reeds, and they start to vibrate, and that sets up air waves. The air waves are hitting your eardrum. It's getting focused in here. This is which makes this vibrate, and finally gets the vibration over to here. So now we've gotten it over to the inner ear. Now, the eustachian tube deal over here, this is an open air tube to the pharynx. Now the pharynx, of course, is the throat. And the reason for this is that this chamber is full of air, and it has to kind of be that way because you got air on this side, you got air on this side, and that means that the eardrum can vibrate well. And but it'll only vibrate well if the air pressure is the same on both sides. So this can't be a sealed chamber. This has to have some outlet to the outside, because if you ever play around with a drum, if you put your hand on the drum heavy and then you're hitting it, it sounds dead, right? Well, that's the same thing when you have a cold. When you have a cold, you get inflammation here, the eustachian tube closes, and then whatever the air pressure is in here, well, you're stuck with it, and you know in New York the air pressure goes up and down all the time. So you got a cold, this is yesterday's air pressure, this is today's air pressure, and it's going to be pressing on the eardrum, and that's why when you do have a cold, it sounds like somebody is talking to you down the end of a very long tunnel, because your hearing's just not that good. Now, other fun facts about these things: earaches in children. Half of all earaches in children can be traced to fecal oral contact, which, as I was warning my daughter about this when she was a child, she's like, poop in mouth? And I'm like, well, yes, dear, that's why it's so important that you wash your hands when you go to the bathroom. And she's like, anyway, because, you know, kids, they're not all that careful, and then they're doing this kind of thing and all this other stuff. So anyway, that's one of the things about this, because if you get bacteria, I mean, you've got bacteria in the mouth anyway, but if you get certain kinds, they're going to start to percolate, and then a sore throat can climb up the eustachian tube, and now you have an infection in here, which is a much more serious arrangement. And that's why doctors are always, a little bit cautious about kids with sore throats, because you never know if it's going to get in here and cause all kinds of havoc. Now, some other things that are going, so this is also why your ears pop when you're in an elevator, because this is not that big a space, and some people's are smaller than others. So, you're going up in an elevator, and this is like partially trapped, but then as the pressure out there gets less, and the pressure in here stays the same, sooner or later, it'll pop out. And then when you're going down, the same thing. Even more when you're in a plane. Yeah, that's a huge pressure differential. And this is why you get screaming baby syndrome on planes. It's really terrible, because on babies, all of this stuff is much, much smaller, and it's really hard for babies to move that stuff. So, and it hurts. The pressure on their eardrum, and the plane is up at altitude, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. You just got a screaming baby for 5 hours, and you can breastfeed it and things like that, because as long as it's, they also tell you to drink water or something like that. All of that is to move the pharynx around so that you can maybe open this thing. So that's all good.
And those 3 beads, the malleus incus.
Yes, those are an artistic interpretation of the malleus incus and stapes. Hello.
Where's the professional development being held?
I have no idea. So this is professional development for massage?
Yeah.
Well, you have 7 rooms to try. I know it's not that one, so it's got to be in that direction.
It should be the first one on your left.
Okay. Thank you.
So in that order,
The malleus, yes, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. The malleus, the incus, and the stapes. Now,
is there a membrane between the eustachian tube and the malleus?
between the eustachian tube and, no, there's no membrane here. That's how bacteria can get in there.
Let me ask you, when children, and they put a stent or anyone that has to put a stent in their ear, where do they put it?
A stent in the ear?
Yeah.
For what?
So my girlfriend, who's 30-something, her ear canal is very narrow, so they have to put a stent to open it, or she has just a wax buildup and they put a stent.
Oh, well, a stent is going to be a tube, so they're just sticking it in here to hold it open, basically, yeah. Well, when they put, a stent is usually a tube you put in another tube. So,
Right,
for
I
instance,
know
in a
where
blood
the
vessel, they're
stent
gonna shove it in a blood vessel and pop open the blood vessel. So, I don't know what they're doing with it, but they're probably just putting a thing in here to hold it open and prevent the wax. Because also, then the wax can't build up in the canal. It's going to be over the canal. So
They do that to kids too.
sometimes if they're not paying attention. So now the stapes is, oh, by the way, this thing here, which looks like a snail's shell, is called the snail's shell. It's a cochlea, right?
Oh, yes.
Cochlea. Cochlea is the snail shell. It kind of curls around more than that, but Danny has a headache, so I didn't draw the whole thing. Anyway, so it's connecting. Now this little thing over here is the oval window. The oval window is not a true window. It's just the membrane is thinner there.
I think he still has some brandy.
Oval window. And well, then we ran out of brandy, and then we changed to gin, which is
that's a nasty one.
no, that's a legitimate French 75 with lemon and all of that. But changing over like that, it's sort of in mid-course.
Yeah.
Was definitely not a good plan. Oh man. Now, and over here we have the round window. Now, round window. And again, these aren't real windows. These aren't like an opening in the thing, but what they really are is the membrane is a little bit thinner at that point. So basically vibration can get in or get out easier. So these two windows are really just a thinning of the cochlear membrane. Now, the auditory nerve, right over here, the green thing, is sticking into this space, and this thing is filled with fluid, which is perilymph, but you don't have to worry about that. The thing is that, the source of this fluid is going to be the source of all the other fluids in the body. It's coming from the blood plasma, it's leaking out there. There's nothing special about the fluid particularly, but sound goes through fluid much better than it goes through air, because liquid is more dense, which means the vibration molecules get bounced better. And I don't know if you've ever been swimming underwater, but you can hear a motorboat like miles away. So what we've done is we've gotten the fluid over to here. So now I'm gonna put the sound waves in blue. Okay, so I'm talking right now, and then the sound is gonna be going down here, makes this bounce, 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 and that's gonna generate sound waves going here. And the sound waves are going to make these things move. And these green things are the dendrites of the auditory nerve, okay? So these things are dendrites, and dendrites vibrate and send impulses.
I don't know what that means.
I don't know what that means either.
Now, the couple of things about this. So you know that if a dendrite is some stimulus has to come along, and these dendrites, when they bend, they open up sodium channels and they start their impulses here. But not all of them are going to bend at once. So a couple of interesting things about sound. If you're in an orchestra pit and you play a cello, if you just bow a string without any chord work. If there's another cello in the orchestra pit, that same string will start to vibrate because the string is vibrating a certain frequency. Anything else that's the same frequency is going to pick up that energy and it's going to start vibrating. So this is kind of the way this thing works, because the dendrites some of them are very thin and some of them are very thick. So think about a guitar. Which strings on the guitar make the deeper sounds? The bigger, thicker ones, and of course the higher ones are going to be the skinnier strings. This is going to be the same arrangement. The diameter, the size of these dendrites is going to vary, and the bigger, heavier ones are going to pick up the deeper sounds, and the lighter ones are going to pick up the Mickey Mouse sounds. So that's sort of what's going on here, and then all of this is going through the auditory nerve. And so, a little bit of review since the final is the next class. So, from the auditory nerve, you're going to go into the thalamus, because all sensory information except for smell is going to the thalamus. Thalamus is going to sort that out. Thalamus is going to say, well, that's some kind of sound stuff, so we're going to send it to the temporal lobe. And the temporal lobe starts to listen to it, and that's the primary temporal lobe, which is just doing pitch, rhythm, and volume, and then it says, oh, well, this is language. I can tell by the cadence this is language. It's going to send it to the association area, which is going to send it to the Wernicke's area, and that's how my thoughts become your thoughts. If it was music, it would be sent to other areas in the temporal lobe, and you'd be, listening to tunes. Now, some other things about this, since the bigger ones are getting the deep volume, and the thinner hairs are getting the higher pitch, the thinner dendrites are more fragile, and they break easier, and they get damaged over time. And so this is how people start to lose their hearing. You're with like an old person in a restaurant or something. I can hear you just fine. You're just mumbling. I can't, In my day, people would talk clearly. And that's the way it was, and they loved it. So, but what's happening is the following. Language is lyrical. It goes up and down, and some languages are a lot more lyrical than others. Like English, American English is actually pretty flat, but British English, it goes all over the place. All these flippy things, and they talk like it. You just watch Monty Python, it goes all over the place. So also French, Spanish, they go up and down a lot as they're talking. So somebody is talking to you, and the frequency is going like this. And if you're missing the upper, if you're missing the higher stuff, this is what you're hearing. You're missing the tops of all the words. And so yeah, I can hear you just fine, but I can't understand you because every other syllable is like getting lost there. And it's especially difficult to pick out if it's in a room full of people that you have to tease it out of. And that's why on TV, they have what's called the network standard. So they take somebody with a deep voice to be the anchor, male or female. You always want to have a deep voice. And then they train them to speak in this monotone, because if it's a steady monotone, no inflections, then any old deep person listening to Fox News can still understand what you're saying forever and ever and ever. And I just never stop, because I'm a conservative, and then I stop frothing at the mouth. Anyway. So anyway, so that's what that stuff is all about. But the problem is all of our electronic devices are causing damage to our ears, because if because you can put in your phones, right? So if anything over 100 decibels is causing damage if you're listening to it for more than 15 minutes. So what's that? Decibels. Decibels. And to give you an idea of what 100 decibels sounds like, that sounds exactly like a train coming into a platform. So everybody in New York is a little bit deaf because of the subways to start with, and that's why everybody who worked for the MTA has these things now. Why do they have these things? Because for the last 100 years they've all been going deaf, so somebody finally figured out, well, maybe they should wear something on their ears and they don't go deaf. But anyway, so now the only thing that saves us is that the train is only coming into the station for like 20 seconds. So, and if you're exposed to that much noise for 20 seconds, it's more than 15 minutes it's going to do damage. But then it's one of those things. But when you get inside the car, it's pretty noisy too. It's about 80 decibels. And 80 decibels is thought to be safe, but they're starting to wonder about that, because you know how noisy it is on the inside of the cars, and they don't. I wear earplugs all the time now when I'm in the trains, because it's I should be doing it all the time. But but think about this: you're on a subway train, and somebody's got their earphones in, and you can hear their god awful music across a subway train, which means that they must have it cranked way over 100 decibels. And that's probably making you deaf. With all the other apps that they have on these phones, there should be one that says, we are now making you deaf and adjust it down. Because this is like a national, and I got a little bit of it myself because of exercising, and you know, you get your tunes in, and it's even worse then because your blood is really flowing. Anyway, so that's what's going on with that. Now, by the way, the round window over here is to
They didn't react to us.
the round window is to let the sound out because it's bouncing around in here, and then finally because the thing is, it gets over to here, it would start bouncing back, and you get echoes all over the place. So the sound is let out and just basically absorbed by the skull at this point. So you want to wear earplugs, and you want to watch it with the sound in your on your devices. And there's another thing in here too. We've changed the air wave to a physical vibration to a water wave. Why don't we just bring this right over here? You know, we save a lot of negative. You know, what's the whole point of having these? It's control over the volume, the amount of sound, because there's a muscle attached to the malleus, and that muscle will contract when the sounds are very loud. So if you're if you're on a subway or you're in a disco or something like that, and the muscle is contracting, it's contracting because the tighter this is, the less vibration of these bones, which means the less power going to the sound waves over here. So it's sort of like turning down the volume. It's very much like the iris can constrict if there's too much light. This can contract if there's too much noise. And this is why if you've ever gone to one of these parties, by the time you get out of it, you can't hear anything. And then you and your friends are walking down the street screaming at the top of your lungs to the great love of everybody who lives on that street, because you really, it's all turned down. The problem is our devices now can sort of defeat this because, if you're listening to your iPhone or whatever it is, and this starts to like spasm because it's too damn loud, you just turn up the volume, so it defeats the whole purpose, and you end up just erasing all of your dendrites. Yeah.
So what happens when you get a headache? What happens in the mid-ear? Because that's where the sound wave will change if you have a headache, right?
If you have a headache?
You know how it is, you can't really, you can't stand the sound of hearing, like even your own heartbeat.
That's
little...
the increased sensitivity to
Yeah.
sound when you have a fever usually.
Or a headache.
Is when that happens. I think that's a software problem. It's not really a hardware problem. You just get much more sensitive to, because remember that one of the functions of the brain is to like ignore a lot of stuff, or at least decrease a lot of sensory information. So I think one of the problems during a fever or a headache or a real challenge to your homeostasis is going to be the brain's ability to tune all that stuff out. So yes, sound sensitivity, light sensitivity when you have a headache, all of that stuff. The brain is like, oh no, please God, it just can't shut it out like it usually does. Also, when you have a headache, remember, since a lot of headaches are caused by too much blood pressure up here anyway, then every beat of the heart, boom, boom, so that's your pounding headache. And you can hear it in your ears. Yeah?
When you get water in your ear, it feels as if it can never come out. And you have to jump in.
Even that doesn't work. Looking like a...
You even try to like hit your head, hoping that the water is gonna come out.
I like the demos. Right, she's okay. She's a little twitchy, but she's fine. Yes. Water. Okay. You're talking about a canal that's smaller than the canal in this pen, okay? So you imagine if you put water in here, it would fill the whole thing up and it would stick. And of course, for a pen, you can do this, but for your head, you got to do that. So that's why. And I mean, it does eventually come out, but sometimes it's difficult, and it takes a long time for it to drain. And
it can cause infection, because I had.
You can get an infection on the outside of the ear as well, especially if it's fresh water, like if you're swimming in a lake.
Yeah.
There's like, oh my God. See, seawater is not so bad because it's salty and that kills a lot of bacteria. But marine life, from freshwater, like freshwater divers, it's like you have whole like civilizations in there. So let me see, so that's the auditory part of this. Now, some fun facts about all of this stuff. The frequency that you can hear depends on the thickness of the dendrites over here. So elephants have, well, the size of those ears, elephants have really, really thick dendrites in there. So elephants can hear things that we would experience as a vibration. So, for instance, they can hear an earthquake coming, and their feet are actually sound sensors. I mean, besides carrying them around. So elephants make these very, very deep vocalizations, which we didn't realize because we were in vibration. And if an elephant is on hard ground like rock, it'll make the rock vibrate as it's doing these. And they found elephants talking to each other across 15 miles over the horizon. Basically, they can communicate like that because of those deep ones. Now, dogs are famous for their high-pitched hearing, right? You got a dog whistle that people can't hear because their cochlea has even thinner ones than ours do. So those very, very high vibrations dogs can hear. Unfortunately, they can also go deaf easier because of that. But the number one winner for long-term free global communications are whales. So they figured out kind of how this works with whale song. And a thing is that when whales are going to do their song, they hang on their head like this. So tail up, head down, and they just hang in the water like that, and they start these songs. But they're doing it in a specific place because the ocean is like a layer cake. You have the water, you got the waves on the top. But as you go down into the ocean, you've got these different levels of water, and you've got different temperatures and currents, and they move independently of each other. So you can have your surface current going in this direction, your deeper current going in that direction, and an even deeper current than that going in this direction. So they're very much, and these in between, like one layer and another, you can feel a difference in the temperature, you can feel a difference in the density and chemistry and stuff like that. So what a whale will do when a whale wants to talk to somebody is they will go down to one of these layers, and it's sort of like a party line for whales, because they're gonna go down there and they're gonna hang on their head like this, because their sound producing equipment goes out from their head on both sides. So then they're talking, and the sound will bounce off the different layers. It'll bounce, bounce, bounce. So it stays in this layer, and that prevents the sound from dissipating. And the Navy has tracked whales talking to each other over 700 miles of open ocean, because one group will say something and the other group will say something. This is a leftover from the Cold War, because the Atlantic and the Pacific used to be wired for sound, because we were looking for Russian submarines all the time. And the Navy guys were listening to all this stuff. They could eventually tell the sounds of individual submarines, because if you're, first you can tell the difference between classes of submarines. They sound very different, but if you're listening for long, these guys are just listening for years. They can pick out, that's the Tupolev. They knew the individual, and of course on their spare time, since they're just listening to the water all the time, what else are you going to do? They're listening to the whales, and they found out that each whale actually sounds different. Whale song is individual to the whales, and they're all kind of talking, and then they've done more. At the end of the Cold War, the Navy donated all of its listening equipment to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. So all those microphones are still on, but now they're being used to study the whales. And what they have found is that whales have language. We can't figure it out, but they can, because each pod of whales has a calling signal that's like a last name, like a family name, and then the individual whales also have first names. It's unique to them, so they've got like a two-call signal, first name and last name, and like some of them are pals. Like they'll not mating pairs or anything like that. They're just friends, and they hang out together. Let's go over here, and they just hang out and do all kinds of stuff, and they play whale games, and well, no, like the dolphins, they'll play a sort of a version of football. They grab seaweed on their fin, and then everybody else has got to get the guy with the seaweed and get the seaweed back to where it was and stuff like that. So very sophisticated play going on there in the ocean. So that's the deal with that's the deal with hearing. Now remember that the other name for the auditory nerve is the vestibulocochlear nerve. So we got the cochlear end down, but it's going to be joined by the vestibular branch. So basically, the vestibular branch, let's just say it's coming from over here. You know, they join together and they both go to the brainstem, to the medulla actually. So the vestibular branch comes from a place called the vestibule, which is a little chamber inside the temporal bone, and that's got your navigation equipment. It's got your things to control your. Everybody got this thing there? Things to control your equilibrium. Now, there's two different kinds of equilibrium. There is static equilibrium. Static equilibrium. And that means basically knowledge of position of the head in relation to the planet. So you don't need to, look, for instance, when you wake up in the morning, you don't need to, if your head is like this or face up, you don't have to have your eyes open to figure out which way your head is, because there are these sensors that can detect gravity and then just figure out where your head is. And you don't have to know the details about these too much, but it looks kind of like two toothbrushes at a 90-degree angle. So you've still got one like this and one like this, and then they've got these hairs hanging down like this, and these hairs, of course, are dendrites once again, and then you've got this heavy colloid on the edges of these, like this. So if your head is upright like this, let's say this thing is going to be like that, which means that this little section is going to be a downward pull on this, so they'll all kind of be, all of these will be bent that way, and all of these will be under tension, right? But then if you move your head like this, it's the same as putting this down like this, so then it's going to look like this, and it's going to look like this. And so now, the tension on these things is going to be different. Now, this one is now under tension, and this one is now getting bent down that way. And so all of this goes into the vestibular nuclei in the medulla. Remember the vestibular nuclei in charge of your writing reflexes, because one of the things is, where's my head? And, you know, it can be fooled when you're in a car if you accelerate really fast. Actually, it was Einstein that figured this out. Acceleration is just like gravity. So there's something weird about that. So anyway, so that's static equilibrium, knowledge of position of the head in relation to the planet. But that's not going to be enough when you're moving around a lot. When you're moving around, you need dynamic equilibrium. Dynamic equilibrium. And that's going to be for head movement. And that is from a gadget called the semicircular canals. The semicircular canals. You have one in each plane of space that we move through. How many dimensions of space do we have? Right. See Avengers, end of whatever, until the next sequel in 3D, 3 dimensions. Because we've got the sagittal plane, movement back and forth. We've got the coronal plane, which is going to be like this, and we've got the transverse plane, right? So you have one semicircular, in each ear, so you've got one on each side. But you have a semicircular canal aligned with each plane of space. So one for each plane of space that we move through. And so I'm just going to draw the one that is in the coronal plane, the one right here, okay? So it's gonna look something like this. So we have the inner, and we have the outer, we got this little bump out over here. And this bump out is full of fibers. And this all goes to the nerve. And this is full of fluid, okay? So there's fluid in here. So basically what happens is, if I move my head in this direction, if I move it basically like this, then the fluid is going to go in the other direction because, you know, there's a certain inertia to that. So if you move the head like that, the fluid brushes against these in this direction. All those get brushed that way, and you interpret that as moving your head like so. And of course, there's one for this stuff, and there's one for rotating around. So you can almost imagine like a coffee cup like this, and as you know, I move this back and forth. The coffee in it is not really moving around very much, so any hairs sticking into it are going to get twisted around. And this brings me to kids' games. So one of the things we like to do when we're kids is we like to spin around until we're dizzy. And what happens is, if you spin around and around and around and around and around, and you keep on going, eventually the fluid inside is going to start moving. There's going to be drag. So what happens then is, when you stop, the fluid is moving, the fluid is brushing against this, and therefore you have this feeling that you're moving when you're not, and your visual field will actually move to one side, because this is one of those confusions when you get two different information from two different senses. The eyes are telling you you're not moving, and your navigation equipment is telling you you are. You get this weird feeling. And there are other times this happens too. When you're, for instance, have you ever been on a subway train and it's stopped in the station, it's not moving, but the train across from you starts to move?
Yes, you just.
That's one where your eyes are telling, because your whole visual field starts to move, and the eyes are saying you're moving, and this is saying no, you're not, and you get this weird feeling because remember the Gnostic area in the brain, which is trying to figure everything out? That's who has to sort this out. When you get different things from different monitors, you got to figure it out. So that's what goes on with that kind of thing. And by the way, one of the things about when you're drunk is that alcohol diffuses into the semicircular canals. Now, alcohol is lighter than water. So, and these things are sort of on the side. So when the alcohol is diffusing in, it's going up, and it's brushing up on these things, and it's brushing them upward. So I think when people are getting drunk, they tend to fall over to the left.
Yes.
And then when they're sobering up, they fall over to the right.
Yes.
Because as the alcohol is leaving, it's like sinking back down and being absorbed out of the body, the displacement there. So all mysteries solved. That is the end of
Drunk?
Neuro.
So how is it that dancers do not have this happening?
Good question. It's going to be adaptation, the same thing that happens with smell. The stimulus is still there, but your sensation of it decreases because they train themselves from doing that. And also they spot. When a dancer turns, they pick a point, and so then as they spin like this, you've ever seen them doing it, they're spotting. That's using the visual. I'm not exactly doing the best I can right now.
Try focusing on his head and go that way.
The skull?
We had a spot. There was Tanya.
Yeah, Tanya was the spot.
You just needed to be tighter on the bottom.
Yeah, I know. I need. Yeah,
Don't worry.
it's
Gotcha.
Saturday morning here. So, but that's so. This is a classic example of using the eyes to back up your sense over here. So, all right, wise guys, everybody stand up. Everybody stand up.
We see you.
I got it.
We're going to be testing our ability in static. No, I'm not going to make you spin around.
This is how they taught us in school.
Okay, everybody. So we're testing our sense of equilibrium. So just pick up one foot. There you go. Just hang out on one foot. This is your sense of balance, your sense of equilibrium. Now, you're using your semicircular canals, but you're also using your eyes. So try to do it with your eyes closed and see how well that works.
Oh, that's not
Uh-huh. Some people are professionals, think, wow, she's a sensei. But see, it's not easy, right? So when you close your eyes, balance is harder, and that's why the sobriety test for the police, they have you, I mean, I've seen this happen to other people. They have you stand there and you have to lean back, and then you have to do this kind of thing with your eyes closed. And what they're looking for is called a Romberg sign. If you fall over, that's a positive Romberg sign. If you don't fall over, well, you're not drunk enough yet. So that's basically what's going on with that. But dancers, from training, they learn to take us, and skaters even more, because skaters don't spot. They spin like a top.
Yeah.
So they're just getting used to they're getting used to different sensations, and the brain adapts it. It interprets it in a different way. Another example is on the water. They call it getting your sea legs. If you get on a moving boat and you're like moving all over the place, how do you walk on a heaving deck? You get used to it. After a couple of weeks, you can do it without a problem. But the weird thing is, I spent quite a bit of time on a boat. I worked a lobster boat once, and just to see what it was like. And from being on that deck for so long, when you got back to the dock,
You felt it, right?
it was weird. The dock was hard to walk on because I was so used to a moving platform. So then it's like having to, fix yourself back and uninterpret things the way they.
That's how it is on a cruise. You're on a cruise for a week, come off, you're just like, wait.
Right. You get used to that motion. Or even if you're just at Rockaway and you're body surfing for a while, you just get used to that motion. So, static equilibrium and dynamic equilibrium. So now, let's see. The final is 50 questions. It's multiple choice. It's true or false. It's very much like the tests that are in the Moodle for your practice. And remember that both of those are due on Tuesday, so the test is on Wednesday. Let me see. I don't think there are any pictures on this one. I can't remember. But if there was, it would be something like a cross section of the spinal cord or sagittal cut of brain, something like that. Where all little. It's got a screw loose. Where all little parts. So that's the basic deal for that one. Now we really already did the last third. We kind of just those should be pretty hot in your mind because we just did the autonomic nervous system, the cranial nerves, and things like that. But I guess do you have anything particular that you want me to do? Because I'm just going to be doing the highlights.
You're fresh up in the beginning.
Fresh up on the beginning? Yeah, that's a good place to do. Good place to
To refresh our memory. Since we
I
still
mean,
have the cranial nerves.
Well, because I'm assuming you get, homeostasis. You're going to keep everything on an even keel. You're going to use negative feedback to keep yourself on an even keel. Because the good thing about this is there have been many, many examples of that. So, divisions of the nervous system. Central nervous system, you've got the brain, the cord. The peripheral nervous system, you've got your 31 pairs of spinal nerves and your 12 pairs of cranial nerves. And remember the division of function, especially in the peripheral nervous system. Once again, if you're running into trouble on the test, you can bring scrap paper in, as long as it's blank when you start. What you put on it, but for the division of functions, okay? So the division of functions of the peripheral nervous system, one side is sensory and one side is motor. And remember that sensory is afferent and motor is efferent. The sensory itself divides into the special senses and the general senses. You know that story? Special senses are entirely in the head, general senses are throughout. Now for the motor system, you have the somatic and you have the autonomic nervous system. And the difference with these is the effectors, for one thing. The effectors of the somatic are going to be the skeletal muscle And they're under voluntary control, those pyramidal tracts calling the shots. Now the autonomic nervous system, what are the effectors of the autonomic nervous system?
The heart, the smooth muscles, and the glands.
Heart, smooth muscle, and glands. So ANS is going to be heart, smooth muscle, smooth, and the glands. And you know that the autonomic nervous system further divides itself down into your sympathetic and parasympathetic systems, fight or flight, rest and digest. You know that the sympathetic is going to be the thoracolumbar system because it's going through spinal nerves T1 to L2. And this one is the craniosacral system because it's cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10, sacral nerves 2, 3, and 4. And of course, you really want it. You should, just as a thing, you should probably just do this from scratch. Do this from a blank board. The big picture on things, because remember the shoebox thing. Sometimes you can't think of something exactly, but if you just start to pull in stuff, you can do better. Now, we get into the cells. I'm going to. I'm looking for the remote. Because it's white on a white background. It's hard.
Yes, dear.
So come on, baby. All right.
No, it was
Oh,
and go.
So if we go into the cells of the nervous system, here they are. So
can I turn off the light?
yeah, turn off the lights. So when you're talking glial cells, just knowing the basics is fine. Each one of them has one basic thing that it does. So the astrocytes are star-shaped, and look at this beautiful sleeve. They are making a sleeve over the thousands of miles of capillaries that you have in the central nervous system. So the neurons are going to be out here someplace, and so anything that's in the vessels will have to diffuse through them to get to the neurons. So oxygen and glucose